Spiritual Progress by Francois Fenelon. Christian Counsel on Diverse Matters Pertaining to the Inner Life. I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness do not appear. And anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. Revelation 3:18. 1. Of the little knowledge of God there is in the world. What men stand most in need of is the knowledge of God. They know, to be sure, by dint of reading, that history gives an account of certain series of miracles and marked providences. They have reflected seriously on the corruption and instability of worldly things. They are even, perhaps, convinced that the reformation of their lives on certain principles of morality is desirable in order to their salvation. But the whole of the edifice is destitute of foundation. This pious and Christian exterior possesses no soul. The living principle which animates every true believer, God, the all and in all, the author and the sovereign of all, is wanting. He is in all things infinite, in wisdom, power, and love. And what wonder if everything that comes from his hand should partake of the same infinite character and set at naught the efforts of human reason? When he works, his ways and his thoughts are declared by the prophet to be as far above our ways and our thoughts as the heavens are above the earth. He makes no effort when he would execute what he has decreed, for to him all things are equally easy. He speaks and causes the heavens and the earth to be created out of nothing, with as little difficulty as he causes water to descend or a stone to fall to the ground. His power is coextensive with his will. When he wills, the thing is already accomplished. When scriptures represent him as speaking in the creation of the world, it is not to be understood as signifying that it was necessary that a word of command should issue forth from him, in order that the universe he was about to create should hear and obey his will. That word was simple and interior, neither more or less than the thought which he conceived of what he was about to do, and the will to do it. The thought was fertile, and without being rendered exterior, begat from him, as the fountain of life, the sum of the things that are. His mercy, too, is but his pure will. He loved us before the creation of the world. He saw and knew us, and prepared his blessings for us. He loved and chose us from all eternity. Every new blessing we receive is derived from this eternal origin. He forms no new will respecting us. It is not that he changes, but we. When we are righteous and good, we are conformable to his will and agreeable to him. When we depart from well-doing and cease to be good, we cease to be conformable to him and to please him. This is the immutable standard which the changeable creature is continually approaching and leaving. His justice against the wicked and his love towards the righteous are the same thing. It is the same quality that unites him to everything that is good, and is compatible with everything that is evil. Mercy is the goodness of God, beholding our wickedness and striving to make us good, perceived by us in time. It has its source in the eternal love of God for his creature. From him alone proceeds true goodness. Alas, for that presumptuous fool that seeks it in himself. It is God's love towards us that gives us everything. But the richest of his gifts is that we may love him with that love which is his due. When he is able by his love to produce that love in us, he reigns within. He constitutes where our life, our peace, our happiness, and we then already begin to taste that blissful existence which he enjoys. His love towards us is stamped with his own character of infinity. It is not like ours, bounded and constrained. When he loves, all the measures of his love are infinite. He comes down from heaven to earth to seek the creature of clay whom he loves. He becomes creature and clay with him. He gives him his flesh to eat. These are the prodigies of divine love in which the infinite outstrips all the affection we can manifest. He loves like a god, with a love utterly incomprehensible. It is the height of folly to seek to measure infinite love by human wisdom. Far from losing any element of its greatness in these excesses, he impresses upon his love the stamp of his own grandeur. He manifests delight in us bounded only by the infinite. Oh, how great and lovely is he in his mysteries! But we want eyes to see them, and have no desire to behold God in everything. 2. Of the necessity of knowing and loving God. It is not astonishing that men do so little for God, and that the little which they do costs them so much. They do not know him, scarcely do they believe that he exists, and the impression they have is rather a blind deference for general opinion than a lively and distinct conviction of the divinity. They suppose it to be so, because they do not dare to examine and because they are indifferent in the matter. Their soul is being distracted by the inclination of their affections and passions for other objects. But their only idea of him is of something wonderful, far off and unconnected with us. They think of him as a stern and powerful being, ever making requisitions upon us, thwarting our inclinations, threatening us with great evils, and against whose terrible judgment it behooves every one to be on his guard. Such is the inward thought of those who think seriously about religion, and their number is small enough. He is one who fears God, they say, and in truth such as one fears only, but does not love, as the child is in awe of the master who punishes him, or as the servant is in dread of the blows of whom he serves from fear, and whose interest is utterly regardless. Would he like to be treated by a son or a servant as he treats God? It is because God is not known. If he were known, he would be loved. God is love, says the Apostle John. He who loves him not does not know him. For how could we know love without loving it? It is plain, then, that all those who have hitherto only feared God have not known him. But who shall know thee, O my God? He who shall seek with his whole heart to know thee, who shall know himself with approbation no longer, and to whom all that is not thou shall be as though they were not. The word cannot receive this saying because it is full of itself, on vanity, lies, empty of God. But I trust that there will always be souls hungering for God, who will relish the truth for which I am out to set forth. O my God, before thou madest the heavens and the earth, there was none other but thee. Thou wert, because of thy years. There was no beginning, but thou wert alone. Out of thee there was nothing, and thou didst rejoice in this blessed solitude. Thou art all sufficient in thyself, and thou hadst no need of anything out of thyself, for none can give unto thee. And it is thou that givest to all by thine all-powerful word, that is, by thy simple will. To do nothing is difficulty, and it does whatsoever it will from its own labor. Thou didst cause that this world, which was not as yet, should begin to be, not as workmen of the earth, who find the materials for their work ready made to their hands, and whose art consists in bringing them together, and arranging them by slow degrees in the requisite order. Thou didst find nothing ready made, but didst create all the materials for thy work. It was to nothing that thou didst say, Let the world be, and it was. Thou didst only speak of it, and it was done. But why didst thou create all these things? They were all made for man, and woman was made for thee. This is the order of which thine appointment, and woe to him who inverts it, who would that all should be for him and shuts himself in self. He breaks the fundamental law of creation. No, Lord, thou canst not yield the essential prerogatives of a creator. It would degrade thee. Thou canst pardon the guilty soul that was warred against thee, because thou canst fill it with thy pure love, but thou canst not cease to be at variance with the soul which refers all thy gifts to itself, and refuses to embrace thee as its creator with a sincere and disinterested affection. We have no feeling but fear. It is not to refer to itself to thee, but on the contrary, to think of thee solely with reference to self, to love thee with a single eye to the good thou canst bestow. It is not to lose one's self in thee, but to lose thee in self. What then must be done in order that we may be lost in thee? We must renounce, forget, and forever lose sight of self, take part with thee and shine, O God, against ourselves and ours. Have no longer any will, glory, or peace, but thine only. In a word, we must love thee without loving self in and for thee. God, who made us out of nothing, recreates us, as it were, every moment. It does not follow that because we were yesterday, we shall of course be today. We should cease to exist and return into nothingness, out of which he formed us. Did not the same all-powerful hand prevent? Of ourselves we are nothing. We are but what God has made us, and for so long time only as he pleases. He has but to withdraw the hand that sustains us, and we plunge into the abyss of annihilation, as a stone held in the air falls by its own weight when its support is removed. Existence and life are only ours because they conferred by God. There are blessings, however, of a purer and higher order than these. A well-ordered life is better than life. Virtue is of higher price than health, uprightness of heart, and the love of God. are as far above temporal goods as the heavens are above the earth. If then these lower and baser gifts are held only through the mercy and pleasure of God, with much more reason that must be true of the sublime gift of love. They know thee not, then, O my God, who regard thee as an all-powerful being, separate from themselves, giving laws to all nature, and creator of everything which we behold. They know thee but in part. They know not that which is most marvelous and which most nearly concerns thy rational creatures, to know that thou art God in my heart, that thou dost what pleaseth him. Therefore, this is that elevates and affects me. When I am good, it is because thou renderest me so. Not only dost thou turn my head to it pleaseth thee, but thou givest me one like thy own. It is thyself that loveth. It is thyself that thou lovest in me. Thou art the life of my soul, as my soul is the life of my body. Thou art more intimately present to me than I am to myself. This I, to which I am so attached and which I have so ardently loved, ought to be strange to me in comparison with thee. Thou art the bestower of life. Without thee it would never have been. Therefore it is thou desirest, and I should love thee better than it. O incomprehensible power of my Creator! O rights of the Creator over the creature, which the creature will never sufficiently comprehend! O prodigy of love, which God alone could perform! God interposes himself, as it were, between me and myself. He separates me from myself. He desires to be nearer to me by his pure love than I am to myself. He would have me look upon this me as a stranger. He would have me escape from its walls, sacrifice it whole to him, returning it absolutely and unconditionally to him from whom I receive it. What I am ought certain to be less precious to me than he by who I am. He made me for himself, and not to be his own. That is, to love him, and to will what he wills, and not to seek my own will. Does anyone feel his heart revolt at the total sacrifice of self to him who has created us? I weep for his blindness. I compassionate his bondage to self, and pray God to deliver him from it, by teaching him to love him and above every other object. Thou, then, it is my delight to believe it, art incessantly working within me. There thou laborest invisibly like a miner in the bowels of the earth. Thou dost everything, and yet the world beholds thee not, attributes nothing to thee, and even I myself wandered everywhere, vainly searching for thee outside of myself. I ran over all the wonders of nature, that I might form some conception of thy greatness. I asked thy creatures of thee, and not once thought of finding thee in the depths of my heart, where thou hadst never ceased to dwell. No, O my God, it is not necessary to descend into the depths, nor to pass beyond the seas. It is not necessary to ascend into the heavens to find thee. Thou art nearer to us than we are to ourselves. O my God, who art at once so great and so condescending, so high above the heavens, and so accommodating to the misery of the creature, so infinite and so intimately enclosed in the depth of my heart, so terrible and so lovely, so jealous and so easily to be entreated of those who converse with thee with the familiarity of pure love. When thy children cease to be ignorant of thee, where shall I find a voice loud enough to reproach the whole world with its blindness, to tell it with authority all that thou art? When we bid men look for thee in their own hearts, it's as though we bade them search for thee in the remotest and most unknown lands. What territory is more distant or more unknown to the greater part of them, vain and dissipated as they are, than the ground of their own hearts? Do they ever know that it is to enter within themselves? Have they ever endeavored to find a way? Can they even form the most distant conception of the nature of that interior sanctuary, that impenetrable depth of the soul where thou desirest to be worshipped in spirit and in truth? They are ever outside themselves in the objects of their ambition or of their pleasure. Alas, how can they understand heavenly truths, since, as our Lord says, they cannot even comprehend those which are earthly? They cannot conceive what it is to enter within themselves by serious reflection. What would they say if they were bid to come out of themselves, that they might be lost in God? As for me, my Creator, I shut my eyes to all exterior things, which are but vanity and vexation of spirit, Ecclesiastes 1:14, that I may enjoy in the deepest recesses of my heart an intimate companionship with thee, through Jesus Christ thy Son, who is thy wisdom and eternal understanding. He became a child, that by his childhood and the folly of his cross he might put to shame our vain and lying wisdom. Cost what it may, and in spite of my fear and speculations, I desire to become lowly and a fool, still more despicable in my own eyes than in those of the wise in their own conceit. Like the apostles, I would become drunk with the Holy Spirit, and be content with them to become the sport of the world. I find thee everywhere within. It is thou that dost every good thing which I seem to do. I have 1,000 times experienced that I could not of myself govern my temper, overcome my habits, subdue my pride, follow my reason, nor will again the good which I had once willed. It is thou that must bestow the will and preserve it. Without thee I am but a reed shaken by the wind. Thou art the author of all the courage, the uprightness, and the truth which I possess. Thou hast given me a new heart, which belongs after thy righteousness, and which is athirst for thine eternal truth. Thou hast taken away the old man full of filth and corruption, and which was jealous, vain, ambitious, restless, unrighteousness, and devoted to its own pleasure. In what state of misery did I live? Ah, could I ever have believed that I should be enabled thus to turn to thee, to shake off the yoke of my tyrannical passions? But behold a marvel that eclipses all the world. Who but thee could ever have snatched me from myself, and turned all my hatred and contempt against my own bosom? I have not done this, for it is not by our own power that we depart from self. No, thou art, O Lord, didst shine with thine own light into the depths of my own heart, which could not be reached by any other, and didst reveal the whole of my foulness. I know that, even after beholding, I have not changed it, that I am still filthy in thy sight, that my eyes have not been able to discover the extent of my pollution, but I have, at least, seen a part, and I desire to behold the whole. I am despised in my own right, but the hope that I have in three causes me to live in peace. For I will never flatter my defects, nor suffer them to discourage me. I take thy side, O God, against myself. It is only by thy strength that I am able to do this. Behold what hath God wrought in me, and thou continuest thy work from day to day in cleansing me from the old Adam and building up the new. This is the new creation which is gradually going on. I leave myself, Father, in thy hands. Make and remake this clay, shape it or grind it to atoms. It is thine own. It has naught to say, and only let it always be subservient to thine ever-blessed designs, and let nothing in me oppose the good pleasure for which I was created. Require, command, forbid. What wouldst thou have me do? What not to do? Exalted or abased, rejoicing or suffering, doing thy work or laid aside, I will always praise thee alike, ever yielding up all my will to thine. Nothing remains for me but to adopt the language of Mary. Be it unto me according to thy words. Luke 1:38. Let me, O my God, stifle forever in my heart every thought that would tempt me to doubt thy goodness. I know that thou canst but be good. O merciful Father, let me no longer reason about grace, but abandon myself to its operation. Grace performs everything in us, but does it with and through us? It is by it, therefore, that I act, that I forbear, that I suffer, that I wait, that I resist, that I believe, that I hope, and that I love in all cooperation with grace. Following its guidance, it will do all things to me, and I shall do all things through it. It moves my heart, but the heart must move. There is no salvation without man's action. I must work, then, without losing a moment, that I may put no hindrance in the way of the grace which is incessantly working within me. All the good is of grace. All the evil is of self. When I do right, it is grace that does it. When I do wrong, it is because I resist grace. I pray God that I may not seek to know more than this. All else will but serve to nourish a presumptuous curiosity. O my God, keep me ever in the number of these babes to whom thou revealest thy misery, while thou concealest them from the wise and prudent. Thou causest me clearly to understand what thou makest use of evils and imperfections of the creatures to do good, which thou hast determined beforehand. Thou concealest thyself under the importunate visitor, who intrudes upon the occupation of thy impatient child, that he may learn not to be impatient, and that he may die to the gratification of being free to study or work as he pleases. Thou availest thyself of slanderous tongues to destroy the reputation of thine innocent children, that, besides their innocence, they may offer thee the sacrifice of their too highly cherished reputation. By the cunning artifices of the envious, they layest low the fortunes of those who were too much set upon their prosperity. It is thy hand that sends death upon him to whom life is but a constant source of danger, and the tomb a harbor of refuge. It is thou that makest his death a remedy, bitter enough, it is true, but effectual. For those who were too fondly attached to them, Thus, while saving one by removing him from life, thou preparest the others by that very act for a happy death. Thus thou mercifully strewed bitterness over everything that is not thyself, to the end that our hearts, formed to love thee and to exist upon thy love, mayest be, as it were, constrained to return to thee by want of satisfaction in everything else. And this is because thou art all love, and consequently all jealousy. O jealous God, for thus art thou called. A divided heart displeases thee, a wandering one excites thy pity. Thou art infinite in all things, as in love as well as in wisdom and power. Thou lovest like an infinite God when thou lovest. Thou movest heaven and earth to save thy loved ones. Thou becomest man, a babe, the vilest of men, covered with reproaches, dying with infamy and under the pangs of the cross. All this is not too much for an infinite love. Our infinite love and limited wisdom cannot understand it. How should the finite comprehend the infinite? It was neither eyes to see it nor a heart to take it in. The debased and narrowed soul of man and his vain wisdom are offended, and can perceive no trace of God in the excess of love. For myself, it is by this very character of infinity that I recognize it. This is the love that does all things, that brings to pass even the evils we suffer, so shaping them that they are but the instruments of preparing the good, which, as yet, has not arrived. But when shall we return for love? When shall we seek who seeks us and constantly carries us in his arms? When he bears us along in the tender and paternal bosom, then it is that we forget him. In the sweetness of his gifts, we forget the giver. His ceaseless blessings, instead of melting us into love, distract our attention and turn away from him. 3. On pure love. The Lord hath made all things for himself. Proverbs 16:4. Says the Scripture, everything belongs to him, and he will never release his right to do anything. Free and intelligent creatures are his as much as those which are otherwise. He refers every unintelligent thing totally and absolutely to himself, and he desires that his intelligent creatures should voluntarily make the same disposition of themselves. It is true that he desires our happiness, but that is neither the chief end of his work, nor an end to be compared with that of his glory. It is for his glory that he wills our happiness. The latter is a subordinate consideration, which he refers to the final and essential end of his glory. That we may enter into his designs in this respect, we must prefer God before ourselves, and endeavor to will our own happiness for his glory. In any other case, we invert the order of things. We must not desire his glory on account of our salvation, but on the other hand, the desire for his glory should impel us to seek our own happiness as a thing which had been pleased to make part of his glory. It is true that all holy souls are not capable of exercising this explicit preference for God over themselves, but there must at least be an implicit preference. The former, which is more perfect, is reserved for those whom God has endowed with light and strength to prefer him to themselves, to such a degree as to desire their own happiness simply because it adds to his glory. Men have a great repugnance to this truth, and consider it to be a very hard saying, because they are lovers of self from self-interest. They understand, in a general and superficial way, that they must love God more than all his creatures, but they have no conception of loving God more than themselves, and loving themselves only for him. They can utter these great words without difficulty, because they do not enter into their meaning, but they shudder when it is explained to them that God and his glory are to be preferred before ourselves and everything else to such a degree that we must love his glory more than our own happiness, and must refer the latter to the former as a subordinate means to an end. Chapter 4. On Prayer and the Principal Exercises of Piety. 1. True prayer is only another name for the love of God. Its excellence does not consist in the multitude of our words, for our Father knoweth what things we have in need of before we ask him. The true prayer is that of the heart, and the heart prays only for what it desires. To pray, then, is to desire, but to desire what God would have us desire. He who asks what he does not from the bottom of his heart desire is mistaken in thinking that he prays. Let him spend days in reciting prayers, in meditation, or inciting himself to pious exercises. He prays not only once, truly, if he really desire not the things he pretends to ask. Oh, how few there are who pray! For how few are they who desire what is truly good? Crosses, external and internal humiliation, renouncement of our own wills, the death of self, and the establishment of God's throne upon the ruins of self-love, these are indeed good. Not to desire these is not to pray. To desire them seriously, soberly, and constantly, and with reference to all the details of life, this is true prayer. Not to desire them, and yet to suppose we pray, is an illusion like that of the wretched who dream themselves happy. Alas, how many souls, full of self, and of a imaginary desire for perfection in the midst of hosts of voluntary imperfections, have never yet uttered this true prayer of the heart. It is in reference to that St. Augustine says, "He that loveth little prayeth little, he that loveth much prayeth much." 3. On the other hand, that heart which is the true love of God, and the true desire exist, never ceases to pray. Love, hid in the bottom of the soul, prays without ceasing, even when the mind is drawn another way. God continually beholds the desire which he has himself implanted in the soul, though it may at times be unconscious of its existence. His heart is touched by it. It ceaselessly attracts his mercies. It is that spirit which, according to St. Paul, helpeth our infirmities, and make intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Romans 8:26. 4. Love desires of God that he would give us what we need, but that he would have less regard to our frailty than to the purity of our intentions. It even covers our trifling defects and purifies us like a consuming fire. He maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. 8:27. For we know not what we pray for as we ought, and in our ignorance frequently requests what would be injurious. We should feel like fervor of devotion, distinct sensible joys, and apparent perfections, which would serve to nourish within us the life of self and confidence in our own strength, but lead us on, abandons us to the operations of grace, puts us entirely at the disposal of God's will, and thus prepares us for all his secret designs. 5. Then we will all things and yet nothing. What God gives is precisely what we should have desired to ask, for we will whatever he wills, and only that. Thus this state contains all prayer. It is a work of the heart which includes all desire. The Spirit prays within us for those very things which the Spirit wills himself to give us, even when we are occupied with outward things, and our thoughts are drawn off by providential engagements of our position, yet we still carry within us a constantly burning fire, which not only cannot be extinguished, but nourishes a secret prayer, is like a lamp continually lighted before the throne of God. I sleep, but my heart waketh. The Songs of Solomon 2. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. 6. There are two principal points of attention necessary for the preservation of this constant of prayer, which unites us with God. We must continually seek to cherish it, and we must avoid everything that tends to make us lose it. In order to cherish it, we should pursue a regulated course of reading. We must have appointed seasons of secret prayer, frequent states of recollection during the day. We make use of retirement when we feel the need of it, or when it is advised by those of great experience, and unite in the ordinances appropriate to our condition. We should greatly fear and be exceedingly cautious to avoid all things that have a tendency to make us lose this state of prayer. Thus we should decline those worldly occupations and associates which dissipate the mind, pleasures which excite the passions, and everything calculated to awaken the love of the world, and those old inclinations that have caused us so much trouble. There is an infinity of detail in these two heads. General directions can only be given because each individual case represents features peculiar to itself. 7. We should choose those works for reading which instruct us in our duty and in our faults, which, while they point out the greatness of God, teach us that it is our duty to him, and how very far we are from performing it. Not that those barren productions which melt and sentimentalize the heart. A tree must bear fruit. We can only judge of the life of the root by its fecundity. 8. The first effect of a sincere love is an earnest desire to know all that we ought to do to gratify the object of our affection. Any other desire is proof that we love ourselves under a pretense of loving God, and that we are seeking an empty and deceitful consolation in him. That would make use God as an instrument for our pleasure, instead of sacrificing that for his glory. God forbids that his children should so love him. Cost what it may, we must both know and do without reservation that he requires of us. 9. Seasons of secret prayer must be regulated by the leisure, the disposition, the condition, and the inward impulse of each individual. Meditation is not prayer, but it is necessary foundation. It brings to mind the truths which God has revealed. We should be conversant not only with all the mysteries of Jesus Christ and the truths of the gospel, but also with everything that they ought to operate for us in our regeneration. We should be colored and penetrated by them as wool is by the dye. 10. So familiar they should become to us that, in consequence of seeing them at all times and ever near us, we may acquire the habit of forming no judgment except in their light. that they may be to us our only guide in matters of practice, as the ray of the sun are our only light in matters of perception. When these truths are once, as it were, incorporated in us, then it is that our praying begins to be real and fruitful. Up to that point, it was but the shadow. We thought we had penetrated into the inmost resources of the gospel when we had barely set foot upon the vestibule. All our most tender and lively feelings, all our firmest resolutions, all our clearest and farthest views, are but the rough and shapeless mass from which God would hew us in his likeness. 11. When his celestial rays begin to shine with us, then we see in the true light. Then there is no truth to which we do not simultaneously assent, as we admit, without any process of reasoning, the splendor of the sun, the moment we behold his rising beams. Our union with God must be the result of our faithfulness in doing and suffering all his will. 12. Our meditations should become every day deeper and more interior. I say deeper because by frequent and humble meditation upon God's truth, we penetrate farther and farther in search of new treasures, more interior, because as we sink more and more enter into these truths, they also descend to penetrate the very substance of our souls. Then it is that a simple word goes farther than the whole sermons. 13. The very things which had been, fruitlessly and coldly, heard 100 times before, now nourish the soul with a hidden manna, having an infinite variety of flavors for days in succession. Let us beware, too, of ceasing to meditate upon truths which have heretofore been blessed to us. So long as there remains any nourishment in them, so long as they yet yield us anything, it is a certain sign that we still need their ministration. We derive instruction from them without receiving any precise or distinct impression. There is an indescribable something in them which helps us more than all our reasonings. We behold a truth, we love it and repose on it. It strengthens the soul and detaches us from ourselves. Let us dwell upon it in peace as long as is possible. 14. As to the manner of meditating, it should not be subtle, nor composed of long reasonings. Simple and natural reflections derived immediately from the subject of our thoughts are that is required. We need take a few truths, meditate upon these without hurry, without effort, and without seeking for far-fetched reflections. Every truth should be considered with reference to its practical bearing. To receive it without employing all means to put it faithfully into practice at whatever cost is to desire to hold the truth in unrighteousness. Romans 1:18. It is a resistance to the truth impressed upon us, and of course to the Holy Spirit. This is the most terrible of all unfaithfulness.